Father, can you hear and see us again?
Yes, Your Honour.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Father, we were just looking at the minute, which is at tab 65 of the day bundle of the meeting of 12 January 1993, where a resolution was taken to appoint Day as parish priest of Timboon. Now, a few things further arise from that. Prior to that decision, was there any form of internal process, that is to say within the church, to determine the suitability of Day to be appointed again as a parish priest following these allegations?
I am not aware of any.
So no form of discipline or professional standards process for the church itself to be satisfied, or for the bishop himself to be satisfied that there was nothing in these allegations?
I qualified by saying not that I'm aware of.
Yes. And that, of course, well, I withdraw that. It would have been open to the bishop to have some form of internal process, would it not?
I don't know that procedure.
Do you accept that there were alternatives in dealing with Monsignor Day other than to appoint him again to the position of parish priest?
What do you mean by alternatives?
Well, by this stage, the police had indicated that charges would not be brought forward against Monsignor Day, but there were nevertheless these allegations that had been made against him. It would have been open to the bishop to appoint him to some role that was not the role of a parish priest or assistant priest.
Well, the bishop could have, if he so wished, put him in another position.
Do you appreciate, Father, that there's a difference between, on the one hand, the police or prosecution deciding not to prosecute charges against the priest, and on the other hand, the bishop being satisfied as to the priest's suitability for appointment?
I understand that situation.
And they really should be quite separate considerations, shouldn't they?
Normally they would be.
Yes. Now, if I can refer you to tab 70 of that bundle. You see that that's a letter from the bishop dated 9 December 1993, and he's writing to a parishioner. And I'll show you the relevant part. It's on the second page, the second paragraph, where it starts, "You asked why." Do you see that?
Yes.
And it says, "You asked why Monsignor Day was given another appointment. When the parish of Timboon became vacant in 1973, he applied for it and insisted on his right to a pastoral appointment, and pointed to the fact that the police had not taken action against him despite the complaints that had been made." So just pausing there for a moment. Was that your understanding at the time, that Day had insisted on his right to a pastoral appointment?
No, I had no knowledge. I don't remember anything of that at all.
And then in the next sentence says, "The diocesan consultors of the time who were advising me felt that there was no alternative but to give him the appointment which he sought. Do you have any recollection of that advice having been given?
No, as I said before, I have no recollection of the meeting at which John Day was appointed to Timboon at all, although I see I was there, but I have no recollection of the meeting.
Now, Mildura, where the Monsignor Day had been the parish priest for a long period of time, is right in the far north of the diocese, is that right?
That's right.
And Timboon is just about as far away as one can get within the diocese in the very south, is that right?
That would be true.
And was there anything to your recollection in the fact that Monsignor Day was appointed to a parish at such great distance from the parish where these allegations had arisen?
I don't recall that being a factor because I don't recall any details of the appointment. But it would have to be a parish that was available, and Timboon might have been the only one.
Well, you'll recall to your surprise when His Honour showed you the very long list of appointments that was made at the same meeting, where there were seemingly a number of parishes available all over the place.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to move on now and deal with some issues that arise in relation to Gerald Ridsdale. You know Gerald Ridsdale, of course.
Yes.
And you knew him from when you were in seminary because he was a couple of years ahead of you, is that right?
That is true.
And is it right that you knew Ridsdale's family, or indeed you were a friend of his family?
Of his parents particularly.
Yes. And you saw them regularly, is that right?
Sure. Recently. I didn't get that.
And you used to see his parents regularly, is that right?
Oh, regularly. I thought you said recently. I did. They lived across the road from where I was living at Redan. And it was general practice that I would have breakfast there on a Sunday morning between masses.
So did you maintain an interest then in Ridsdale himself and where he was appointed and how he was travelling as a priest in the diocese?
I wasn't a particular mate or friend of Jerry's. We related professionally quite well, but where he went and what appointments was of no great personal concern to me.
Well, I'm suggesting that given your relationship with his parents, that you may have had greater interest in him than you might have done in priests, or might have had in priests generally in the diocese.
I used to hear a lot about him from his parents. From that point of view, I knew where he was or what moves he was onto.
I want to refer you to a minute of the consulters. It's in the Ridsdale Bundle, Volume 1, Tab 10. Do you see that, Father?
I do now.
Now, the date doesn't appear there, but if you just take it from me for now that was in early 1975, you'll see you recorded as present. Do you see that?
Yes.
And on the second page, at at the foot of the page, you see it says appointments, parish priests.
Yes.
And it has Apollo Bay, and there's a Father Clergy appointed there, and then a few further down, Inglewood, and G. Ridsdale is appointed at Inglewood. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, prior to that, Ridsdale had himself been at Apollo Bay. Are you aware of that?
I don't know his precise movements. Whether I know he was at Apollo Bay at some stage, whether it was just before he went to Inglewood, I don't know.
Well, do you recall why it was that this appointment was being made to Inglewood?
No, I have no recollection of why that would have happened.
Now, I can take you to the document if necessary, but perhaps it's not necessary. Ridsdale said to someone interviewing him on behalf of Catholic Church Insurances that he had put in for a transfer from Apollo Bay because a man had told him, quote, "They are saying things down at the pub about you and kids." Did you know anything about that at that time?
I did not.
Are you saying you did not know, or you do not recall having known?
Well, I don't know the difference. I didn't ask me if I knew at the time. I didn't know. Is that in the minutes?
No, it's not in the minutes. It's not in the minutes. I'm not suggesting you knew about the document. I'm not suggesting you knew anything about this, actually. I'm just asking whether you recall having known that at Apollo Bay, someone had said to Ridsdale that they are saying things down at the pub about you and kids, and for that reason he had put in for a transfer from Apollo Bay.
I do not recall anything of that.
Now, Ridsdale then moved from Inglewood in early 1976, and he's told CCI in relation to that a woman came to him, that is, and said, "There is talk around the town that you've been interfering with the boys and the police are making inquiries," and that he left Inglewood and went straight to Bishop Malkern's the next morning. Did you know about that?
I did not know about that.
Now, you became administrator in Inglewood in late 1976 for a few months, is that right?
That is true.
And so that was later the same year after Ridsdale left Inglewood, is that right?
I'm not sure of the dates or the times. You'll recall I'd been away in 76 and I came back in October and I just filled in at Inglewood until the appointments were made in January.
So your CV that we referred to earlier records 6 months study leave overseas. And the way I read it, and that perhaps that can be shown to you, it was between April 1976. And so it was a few months after that, in April, you went overseas and you returned in October, is that right?
That's right.
And when you returned, you then became the administrator in Inglewood for some 3 or 4 months, is that right?
That is right.
And in your time as administrator in Inglewood, did any of the parishioners or indeed anyone there bring to your attention any allegations or complaints against Ridsdale arising during his time in that parish the previous year?
No, they did not.
Did any of them talk to you about Father Ridsdale's time when he was there?
Not while I was in Inglewood, no.
No one ever talked about Father Ridsdale,
No one talked about it.
good or bad? Never talked about him at all?
No. I was really only there at weekends for most of the time.
But you'd talk to the parishioners while you were there, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah,
And I got to know a few families.
and they never
3
talked to you.
months.
They never talked to you about Father Ridsdale at all, good or bad.
No recollection of that. I would have remembered that had happened.
You would.
I would have remembered if they had.
It's a little surprising that no one ever talked to you about the good points even in Father Ridsdale.
Well, Father McMullen had been there for a while, and he was a personality in himself.
Did they talk to you about him?
Oh, yeah, everyone talked about Father McMullen.
But they never.
He was an Irishman with an accent.
Right. But they never talked a word about Father Ridsdale.
Not a word.
Now, Ridsdale also said in his CCI interview that he was sent to Melbourne, this is following leaving Inglewood, for counselling. Were you aware of that?
Counselling?
Yes.
No.
Right. Now, if I can...
Well, just a minute.
I wasn't
Just a
aware of
minute.
that.
Just a minute. Can we go to document behind tab 86? I want you to look again at the record of the interview that you gave to CCI.
Yes.
Now, if you see on the first page, you are recorded as saying you did not know his prior history, and what I did know was that he had some trouble and he had had counselling. You see that?
You do, yes.
Now, that's the record of what you told the CCI man. You understand?
Yes.
Now, if a priest was having counselling, what did you understand he could be having counselling for?
Well, if I thought about it at all, my first thought would have been for depression, I guess. That's because I lived with a priest who had suffered from depression, and he had frequent counselling, and insofar as I thought about it, but what was the relationship between a priest and the bishop was no concern of mine. I really didn't want to know.
Well, that's all right, but you say here that you knew that he had had counselling.
Yeah, I think the bishop must have told me that. When he
You also say that you knew that he had had some trouble. Now, a priest having trouble, what did you understand that to be?
I don't know what I meant by that, except that he had counselling. If you have counselling, I guess you've got problems. So I don't know any more details than that.
Well, you told us before that you kept pretty good contact with what he was up to through his parents. didn't you?
Yeah, but by this time, I've moved away from Ballarat.
I understand
I
that.
haven't seen his picture.
Had you ever heard of Father Ridsdale suffering from depression?
No, I hadn't.
So when you reported to CCI that he'd had counselling, I take it because you'd never heard that he'd suffered depression, you didn't have depression in mind.
Well, what else would I think? I don't know. You asked me what
Well,
I thought.
the obvious one is that he was having counselling because of his behaviour. That's the obvious one, isn't it?
That wouldn't have occurred to me at all. That would have been my last thought, that he had problems of that particular nature.
Well, then what was the trouble then? You've linked the trouble with the counselling.
Well, it just followed if he was having counselling, I presume that he was having difficulties.
You didn't use the word difficulties, you said trouble. You said trouble.
Well, difficulties, troubles. I can't kind of remember what I had in mind at a particular time.
You see, you go on to say, I believe, and then you say he was supposedly quite fit for parish work. That suggests that he had trouble that took him away to need counselling, but he was now fit for parish work, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes, well, I'd had experience of exactly that with another priest I lived with who had depression. He had counselling and he'd be reappointed to another position.
But you'd never heard that Ridsdale had trouble with depression, had counselling and was required to leave a parish and resume after the counselling, had you?
I'm just trying to get the dates of this. This date, this interview took place in '93.
That's when the interview took place, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I knew that's when the bishop, when he asked me, when he told me that he was appointing Jerry Ridsdale to Horsham, that's what he said. He's had counselling and he's fit for appointment.
Well,
I didn't ask any questions. Why would I?
Well, what did you understand the counselling to be for?
Well, I didn't inquire, but if I had a thought about it at all, it would have been, my first thought would obviously been depression.
Yes.
Now, Father, if I can refer you to that minute that we had, which was tab 11, the one on 16 January 1976.
Yes.
You have that, and we had a look, we saw where you were recorded as being present. And then the next matter is the minutes of the previous meeting were accepted. And then after that it says, after stressing again the confidentiality of all matters dealt with in consultors' meetings, Bishop Mulcairns announced that some matters had arisen in the diocese which might make it advisable to delay making many appointments at this stage. Moves should be kept to a minimum. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you have any recollection of what it was that the bishop announced?
I have no recollection of that whatsoever. I don't know what he was talking about. I'm a bit surprised to see that in the minutes. I don't remember.
And you'll see on the next page, as I showed you earlier, Ridsdale was appointed to Bungaree. It says temporary appointment until end of February. So for some 6 weeks or so on a temporary appointment. Do you recall what was reported or discussed in relation to that?
No, I do not.
And reading this minute and looking back, you're not able to reconstruct what it was, or what it probably was, that gave rise to this need to delay making appointments at that stage and to keep moves to a minimum.
Where's that? Oh, you've lost me. Where did he say we delay making appointments?
No, he said delay making appointments. That's where we were on the first page. The bishop announced that some matters had arisen in the diocese which might make it advisable to delay making appointments. At this stage, moves should be kept to a minimum. Now, you say you have no actual recollection of it. I'm asking you to address the matter at a different level, which is, now looking back at that minute, are you able to assist us in what those matters may have been?
Well, there's a possible explanation for that is when moves are made and they have to be delayed because someone can't be contacted. It's most important from the bishop's point of view that all appointments, and even though they've been made by the consultors or with the bishop with the consultors, that they don't be announced until the people concerned have been contacted. Otherwise, if the people concerned hear it from someplace else other than the bishop, it's embarrassing for him.
Yes, well, but Father, you'd accept this was not such a case because the bishop had announced that some matters had arisen in the diocese, and it was because of those matters that appointments were to be delayed and moves kept to a minimum. And those matters were not that someone or other person or people could not be contacted.
Well, you asked me for a possible explanation, and that's my response to that as a possibility. Reading that minute there now, that's a possible explanation. As for this particular instance, I have no recollection of why he said it.
Well, I'm suggesting in relation to this particular instance, that's not a possibility because it's not consistent to say that some matters have arisen in the diocese if the real reason is that some one or other person or people cannot be contacted. So there's some other reason or matter that's arisen. Stands to reason, Father, doesn't it?
I can see that, but you asked me how I'd interpret that now. And that's still a possible explanation of it. Why he said it at this particular instance, I can't recall.
If I can take you to the next tab, tab 12. You'll see this is a meeting on 18 March 1976, and you recorded as present. Do you have that there?
I have.
And on the second page, it's recorded under moves. Edenhope, G. Ridsdale, pro tem. Do you have any recollection of that?
I do.
And what is that?
Because I was personally involved there. I had, as you know, been given 6 months sabbatical leave, but I was coming out of the bishop's office, or out of the administrators at the cathedral to a country parish. And I was appointed, it was suggested that I would go to Edenhope when I returned in October. And Jerry was sent there to hold Edenhope for me when I came back.
And that in fact, as it happened, didn't transpire, is that right?
I didn't quite get that.
And in fact, that didn't transpire. In other words, when you came back, you didn't go to Edenhope.
No. I was obviously earmarked to go to the cathedral when I came back. Things had changed there a bit, and so I filled in at, as we've said, at Inglewood until the normal moves were made in January, and then it was decided that the situation would be better served if I went to the cathedral.
Yes, and Father Madden, there's a minute at tab 13. On the 19th of July, 1977. Do you see that?
I've got the date, yes.
And you recorded as being present. Do you see that?
I do.
And now you are no longer the Vicar General. As I understand it, your term as Vicar General ended in April 76, when you then went overseas for 6 months. Is that right?
That is right.
And your next appointment as a diocesan consultor, as I understand it, as we canvassed earlier, was in 1979. Are you able to help us with why you were at this meeting in July 1977?
No, I can't. I don't know. What happened there? Oh, possibly because looking at Aquinas College heading, that's all I can see quickly. Jim Ryan was a layman who had succeeded me as the diocesan accountant and did a much better job. And I can only think that I was there in that capacity, that I had a background of the finances of the diocese. So we're going to purchase Aquinas the whole business of Aquinas College. That's all I can suggest.
Well, you'll see in relation to that item, it says that Mr. Jim Ryan, diocesan accountant, was admitted to the meeting to discuss the future of Aquinas College. Are we to understand that
Yeah,
Mr. Ryan was admitted
that's what I'm...
yes, to discuss that item, but was otherwise not present for the meeting?
Jim Ryan or me?
Jim Ryan.
He would have been only there for that part of the meeting, apparently.
1979-82. Yes, and you, in contrast, are we to understand, were there for the whole meeting?
I would have been.
Yes, and then if you look at page 3, or the third page that we have here, Ringtail 131.
Yes.
You see that, and it says, where it's been underlined there, G. Ridsdale was formally appointed as parish priest of Edenhope. His original appointment was as administrator, and he should have been confirmed as parish priest on 14 January 1997. 14th of January 1977. Bishop Malkerns is to write to Ridsdale. Do you see that?
I do.
And do you have any recollection of that?
I have no recollection of that, but I can see the way things developed. It says he should have been confirmed when I was appointed to the cathedral. It would have been on the 14th, I presume, on the 14th of January 70, that I was no longer, he was no longer holding it for me.
And at that stage, do you recall whether there were any discussion whether there was any discussion about any problems that there'd been with regard to Father Ridsdale or his suitability for appointment.
No, I don't recall any discussion about that. I don't recall much about the meetings, for that matter.
Yes, and if we have a look at tab 16, we'll see this is the meeting of 18 January 1980. Do you have that?
Not yet.
And you recorded as being present. Do you have that, Father?
I do. 18th of January 1980, yes.
Yes, so now this was obviously now during the period where you again served as diocesan consultor between 1979 and 1982.
Yes.
And you'll see at the foot of the first page, it records that Father Jerry Ridsdale will be attending NPI in 1980, which I understand to be the National Pastoral Institute. Do you recall anything that was reported or discussed in relation to that item?
Until I saw this meeting, this minute some time ago, that was the first I remembered that Ridsdale went to NPI. But that wouldn't have caused any great kind of comment, because two or three other priests had gone to NPI before that for a year.
Yes, and what I'm asking specifically, Father, is whether you remember anything that was discussed or reported in relation to Father Jerry Ridsdale going to NPI for a year in 1980.
No, I do not recall anything about that.
And the next minute is the next tab, tab 17. Do you have that, the meeting of 16 January 1981?
I do.
And it records you as having been present. And you'll see
I'm not there. Oh, yes, I am. Yeah.
You see it, the second last name listed. And then on the second page, it's recorded it under staffing at the top of the page. It is agreed that the following appointments be made, and included in the list of parish priests, the last one is Mortlake, Reverend G. Ridsdale. Do you see that?
I do.
Yes, and do you recall anything that was reported or discussed in relation to that appointment?
No, I do not.
Now, we know, Father, that during Ridsdale's time as parish priest in Mortlock, 1981 and 1982, a number of complaints arose in relation to him that were made to the bishop or to others such as Monsignor Finnegan or Monsignor Fiscalini. Do you recall whether any of those complaints or reports of problems in relation to Ridsdale at Mortlake came to your attention at that time?
They did not come to my attention at that time.
When did they come to your attention?
Sometime after 1988.
And with reference to what do you recall that it was after 1988?
That's when Jerry Ridsdale himself told me of his difficulties and why he had to move on from Horsham.
Okay, we'll come back to moving on from Horsham in a moment. Father Ridsdale then moved, following these complaints that had been made, was withdrawn from Mortlake and then went to the Catholic Inquiry Centre in Sydney in late 1982. Were you aware of that?
I was aware that he went to Sydney with the Catholic Inquiry Centre.
And what was your understanding at the time as to why he went to the Catholic Inquiry Centre in Sydney?
It was an appointment that wouldn't have caused any comment either, because as I understand it, the Inquiry Centre was led by an order priest, but the different dioceses had undertaken to supply an assistant priest for that work. It was a national undertaking. And when Jerry Ridsdale was appointed there, for the most part, the rest of the priests wouldn't have been surprised because of his particular talents and his ability in that particular field.
Well, let's just address that briefly. What do you say Father Ridsdale's particular talents and ability were?
Well, he was articulate and he'd had a reputation for being an effective communicator, and he just was an efficient operator as far as parish work was concerned.
Well, his talents and ability were with regard to interacting with people and speaking with them. Is that not right?
I didn't quite get that, sorry.
Well, his talents and ability were with regard to interacting with people and personally and speaking with them. Is that right?
Yes, right.
Not particularly in writing.
Not particularly in, I didn't get that.
In writing.
Sorry. Writing. Oh. But I don't know about that. He didn't publish books, that's for sure.
Was the role at Catholic Inquiry Centre, to your understanding, one that required the priest assisting there, in this case Father Ridsdale, to be essentially responding to written inquiries and not to be involved or engaged in pastoral work or with people? Was that your understanding?
I didn't quite know what the details were up there, but I do know that he would go to different parishes at weekends and celebrate the Mass and talk about the work of the Inquiry Centre. That's what I thought it was the main work, and generally following the program. There was a set program from the Inquiry Centre, and it was widely used by priests in the parishes.
Now, I'd like to refer you to a statement that was attended earlier in the week. It's the statement of BWE. It's Exhibit 2889, and I'm hoping that Mr. Hudson, who's assisting you, can lay his hands on that statement.
Right, I have it.
It's tab 21 of the statements bundle.
Yes. The statement.
Now,
BWE.
yes. Now, this is a statement of someone who recounts an incident when he was an altar boy, at which he says that he overheard then Father George Pell say something to you about Jerry Ridsdale. Are you at least familiar with who I'm referring to?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if I can ask you to take a look at paragraph 12 of the statement. Where he says,
Yes.
do you have that? He says, Father Frank Madden was the parish priest of St. Patrick's Cathedral in the early 1980s. Now, leaving it at its general for the moment, we'll be more specific time-wise in a minute. That's in effect true, isn't it?
Only half true. I left the cathedral in June 1982.
Yes, well, that's what I'm coming to. And then you moved and became parish priest at Horsham. Is that right?
That is correct.
From June 1982. Yes. So in 1983, you were the parish priest at Horsham. Is that right?
That is right.
Yes. And whilst at Horsham, well, I withdraw that. You had been, of course, the leader at the cathedral, or in effect, as you put it, parish priest at cathedral since 1977 through to June 1982. Is that right?
That is right. Yes.
And whilst you, and then whilst you were at Horsham, might you have celebrated a funeral at the cathedral? That's the cathedral in Ballarat, obviously.
Something wrong there. He's mistaken me. I didn't go back to the cathedral. I never celebrated a requiem in the cathedral after I left it.
Well,
Not to this day.
Are you sure of that, Father?
I've been concelebrant. I've never been a main celebrant.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's my mistake. I didn't mean to be to limit my question to being the main celebrant. So I'll start again. Once you had gone to Horsham, did you concelebrate any funeral at the cathedral in Ballarat?
The only time I don't recall precisely, the only time I would have gone back to the cathedral, even to concelebrate, would have been for the funeral of a priest or perhaps a priest's parents. But I certainly didn't go back to concelebrate for normal parishioners.
Well, you'd been parish priest at the cathedral for some period of time, 5 or 6 years, and I suppose that you got to know many of the families in your parish quite well. Would that be right?
That'd be right.
Is it possible that you returned to the cathedral to concelebrate a funeral, perhaps of a member of one of those families that you'd got to know?
It's possible, but it didn't happen.
Father, we've learnt of relationships that do develop between priests and particular people or families, and it's common, as I understand it, that priests are invited to celebrate the wedding of people that they've had in their parish previously. Is that right?
Well, that's right. But these days, people are not terribly in touch with their parish. And so when they come to get married, they look back to a priest that they've known in their school days or something like that. And so they kind of ask him to celebrate their marriage, not because of friendship, but because to find a priest to do it.
Well, we've been told of people who have had, obviously, very good relations with the priest, and the priest does come back to celebrate a wedding, but you don't think that happens?
Oh, yeah. It happens, yes.
And we've also been told that in other circumstances in relation to funerals as well. Does it not happen in relation to funerals where a priest forms a close relationship with a family who are good parishioners, that they may be invited back to at least co-celebrate at a funeral?
I think it's bad form to be running back to the parish that you've left. And I didn't do that because that it's the duty and the privilege of the current parish priest to fulfil those pastoral duties. Never enthusiastic about going back to parishes that I had left.
If you're asked to co-celebrate, No, presumably that would require you to speak to the new parish priest. But if you were asked to do that, would you just say no?
Well, it depends on whether you're available or not, or what your current responsibilities are in the parish that you're there. And if you can't get there, or you don't want to get there, people will understand.
Yes, I know, but assuming you were available, would you just say no as a matter of principle, or would you speak to the parish priest who'd followed you?
Well, I certainly speak to the parish priest. I've done it at Horsham on 2 occasions, and I spoke to the priest about it and got his okay and went to the funeral. But I don't recall going back to the cathedral. I've been there in more recent times for a man who worked with me in the office at the cathedral, but I don't recall going back from Horsham to the cathedral. Am I allowed to know whose funeral this was?
Well, it's not entirely clear, but I'll put some possibilities to you. Firstly, it suggested that this person may have been from Bungaree. Does that assist you at all? That's the deceased whose funeral was being celebrated.
Oh, Bungaree, that's has nothing to do with the cathedral. That's a parish on its own, and Ballarat East Parish geographically comes between the cathedral parish and Bungaree. No, Bungaree is just a non-goer.
And one of the names that's been put forward as to whom it may have been was a Margaret, at least a Gladys Pope. Does that name help you?
Oh, Gladys Pope. Tell me more about her.
Well, I don't have more to tell you. I can only offer you that name, Father. Does the name not help you?
It doesn't mean a thing.
Yes. And a Margaret Morgan?
No.
Well, what I can say is that both these women were of relatively advanced age, in their 80s. I can tell you that. Does that help you?
No, it doesn't. No, neither names ring any bells whatsoever.
Yes. And do you remember whether there was an occasion on which you concelebrated a funeral at the cathedral in Ballarat with George Pell?
I'd be very confident saying there was never an occasion. I don't remember George doing a funeral at the cathedral, apart from his cousin Henry Nolan, Monsignor Nolan. And there were a lot of priests at that funeral.
And Bungaree, as I understand it, is a suburb of Ballarat, is that right?
Oh, that's stretching it a bit. It's a country village fairly close to Ballarat.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Father. Yes, now, reverting to your, in particular, to your position as parish priest at Horsham from June 1982, there was a time at which Ridsdale was appointed as assistant priest at Horsham, and that was effective July 1986, is that right?
That's right.
And so he was then assistant to you at Horsham.
That is true.
And now, prior to the appointment of Ridsdale as assistant to you at Horsham, did the bishop or anyone else tell you as to why Ridsdale was being appointed there, or that you should have any duties or special duties or responsibilities in relation to him?
No. The bishop contacted me, and I think he might have even asked me, I'm not sure, if you're allowed to send Jerry Ridsdale up. They would have asked me about, because Jerry technically was my senior. He was 2 years ahead of me, and it would have been unusual to have the junior, the parish priest. That was the only thing I can remember.
Well, in addition to that, Ridsdale himself had been parish priest in a number of parishes, so he was, in a sense, being demoted to being your assistant. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
And so what did the bishop explain to you as to why this appointment was being made?
He didn't explain it to me. He didn't have to. He just asked me, what about Jerry coming up there? And I agreed.
Well, that I suggest seems unlikely that in such a conversation the bishop wouldn't have felt the need to offer you some explanation as to why this, as you put it, unusual appointment was being made.
Well, if I had probed, I probably would have, but I didn't. I just accepted his appointment, and it worked well.
Is it not the case that Ridsdale was being sent to be your assistant so that you could keep an eye on him and keep him out of trouble?
I don't know about that, but keeping an eye on someone. No, I had no thought of that.
Now, you did say that when Ridsdale was at Horsham, he told you about the problems that he had got into. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, are you able to identify when, during Ridsdale's stay at Horsham, that occurred?
Oh, it was on the occasion of his leaving. He had to explain why. He said, I'm moving on. I have to move on. And he told me why.
And so that was in April 1988, is that right?
It was 1988, but I don't remember the date. I think it was shortly after Easter.
Yes. And what is it that he said to you about his moving on?
He said, I have to move on. My past has caught up with me. And I, of course, asked him what he meant by that. And he told me that he had been offending against boys, children, and that the matter was with the police. And he said, I'll go to jail over this.
And did he say anything? Sorry, Father, carry on. I don't mean to cut you off.
My first thought, of course, was he's been running around this parish for 2 years and was a horror and shock, wondering what's happened here. Now, he must have read something of my reaction, because he went on to say, you do not have to worry. Nothing has happened while I've been here with you. It was our final conversation.
Now, just going back to when Ridsdale came to your parish to be as assistant priest in July 1986, had you not been told that he was in some sort of trouble, or did you not understand that he'd be in some sort of trouble and that's why he was coming to you as assistant priest?
Well, I don't know what the troubles were, and apparently I said that in this interview with the CCI man, but the bishop told me that he'd had counselling. So I presume I just deducted from that he must have had some difficulties or problems or troubles or whatever you like to call it.
In 1993, Ridsdale was charged for the first time, and that was obviously public. At that time, once you knew that he was being charged, what did you know of him, firstly, as to his effectiveness as a priest?
Well, all I can comment on is the time he was with me. And he was cooperative and effective, and he was experienced in the work that he did. I was a bit distracted at that time he was with me because we were building a new church. That becomes all encompassing, as people will tell you. And so that he assumed some of the roles that I would normally have done myself.
And what did you know of him at that time, so that's at the time that he was charged, as to the problems that he had?
Well, by 5 years has, and I don't understand this, 5 years has elapsed from when he told me, and he told me then it was in the hands of the police. And it seems to have been a long time before charges were brought against him. By that time, I had picked up some of the rumours that were circulating because around the diocese in that 5-year period. I just don't know, really.
And so you knew then, this is in 1993, that there were at least rumours about Ridsdale having offended in a number of different parishes across the diocese over a long period of time. Is that right?
I probably knew that by when you say knew, I knew he was had offended in that field, but I had no idea of the nature and the extent of his offences.
Would it have been true to say at that time that he was held in high regard by the vast number of people he administered to throughout the diocese?
Yeah. He was known as, because he'd been in a few parishes, I suppose. He was, I don't know about the rest of the diocese or not.
Well, was it not known? Was the circumstances of his offending not widely known by that time, by 1993, and therefore he was not held in high regard by the vast number of people? Would that not be true?
Well, at this time, so many years on, in that regard, I don't know what I knew then or when I knew it or how. It's just too difficult. But all I know is that my first indication of it all was when he told me, because he'd been running around my parish for 2 years and I was quite relaxed about it. I would have been very anxious had I picked up any of the rumours before that.
And how would you characterise your time as working with him in those 2 years?
I generally I'd say it was quite effective and harmonious.
And if I can show you a document, it's at tab 81E of the Ridsdale bundle, that's volume 1. Do you have that document, Father?
It's coming. Yes.
Now, am I right that this is a reference that you wrote for Father Ridsdale for the purpose of his sentencing hearing in March of 1993?
That's how it appears. I don't remember doing it, but obviously I did.
Yes. Well, I'll give you the opportunity to read it, and I'll ask you whether that reference truly reports on what was known to you at that time.
Yeah, that's a fair summary of my relationship. I'm only referring, I think, to the time that I knew him at Horsham.
Father, judges commonly see references like this. You understand? Do you understand that, Father?
I beg your pardon?
It is common for judges to see references like this when they're sentencing people. Do you understand that?
I understand that, yes.
And I assume your letter, by way of reference, was written for the purpose of tendering it to the court when he was sentenced. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, judges look to and expect that people who write references like this will make themselves aware of the offences for which the person is being sentenced. Do you understand that?
I understand what you're saying.
Well, did you make yourself aware of the offences for which Ridsdale was being sentenced when you wrote this reference?
Probably not.
Did you go to court when he was sentenced?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Well, it's one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. But he was a colleague and he was going to plead guilty. And all I could comment on was the time he was with me, about which I was asked by the defending counsel.
When you went to court, did you have any appreciation of the devastation he had caused in many people's lives?
Not at that stage. The first court was a magistrate's court in Melbourne, and the whole thing was fairly low key. And the seriousness and the extent of his offences wasn't brought out in any way. That didn't occur to me until the second trial in Warrnambool, when the victims were present and made their victim statement. And it was only then that I realised what had happened and the nature and the extent of his offences. And I was particularly offended because I knew some of these boys. They had been my altar service at Warrnambool at an earlier time. And after that, I just regretted having been there, but what's done is done.
Mr. Stewart's taken you through the various steps where you have been involved in one way or another in decisions or in working with Ridsdale this morning. You understand that?
Yes.
Do you accept any responsibility as in your various roles for the fact that Ridsdale was allowed to operate as a priest in the diocese and cause such devastation to so many people?
I can't escape some responsibility for my role in not questioning some of the moves. I can understand that in retrospect. And as being part of the College of Consultors and as Vicar General, I have to take some responsibility, and I regret that.
What responsibility do you take?
Well, responsibility for not having asked more questions or being more investigative of what was going on, but going along with what was proposed, and I can understand that now, and one might wish that I'd done something else, because now as I understand the extent and the nature and the effect of his offences, which I didn't then know then, of course, but I take responsibility for my part in not asking more questions or being more curious as to about what was happening with Jerry Ridsdale.
I see the time. I think we'll take the luncheon adjournment.